500,000 troops, backed by heavy artillery, were launched against inadequately armed tribesmen. Ethiopian resistance was strong but futile. For every Italian killed, 10 Ethiopians died. With complete supremacy in the air, Italian planes could bomb and machine gun indiscriminately. The carnage among the Ethiopians was appalling. But even so, the Italian advance was too cautious for Mussolini. He decided a younger, more aggressive commander was needed. The new commander-in-chief of the Italian forces was Marshal Pietro Badoglio. Instructed by Mussolini to reach the capital, Addis Ababa, before the rainy season, Badoglio planned a new and more deadly offensive. In direct defiance of the 1926 Geneva Protocol, signed by Italy, Italian troops were instructed to use poison gas against the Ethiopians. The liquid ypirite or mustard gas was loaded into canisters to be dropped as bombs, fired as shells, or sprayed from the air like insecticide. A new wave of terror was unleashed upon an ill-prepared population.
L'iprite fu usata in grosse bombe di 200
Ypirite was used in big 280-kilo bombs dropped by aircraft.
pesante, se la bomba
Ypirite is a heavy liquid, and if the bomb was dropped correctly, it would explode in the air 200 meters from the ground.
era una pioggia di goccioline in questa area.
The ypirite would turn into a rain of droplets. In this area, death was certain and immediate, because the ypirite droplets penetrated through clothes and skin, burning and destroying the human tissue deep underneath. There is no doubt that ypirite sowed death and spread terror because it was a type of aggression for which the Abyssinians were totally unprepared. They did not even know how to cure those wounded by ypirite.
La guerra chimica in Etiopia era stata
Chemical warfare in Ethiopia had been prepared on a large scale beforehand,
dell'arte di gas per l'uso da parte
with dozens of tons of gas to be used by the infantry, dozens of thousands of gas-loaded shells, and hundreds of tons of mustard gas for the Air Force.
di tonnellate di bombe iprite per l'aviazione. Badoglio trovò questo
Badoglio found this equipment ready and used it even before being given an explicit order to do so by Mussolini.
Mussolini diede l'autorizzazione.
Mussolini gave his authorization on the 28th of December 1935, an explicit authorization to use, even on a large scale, any gas or flamethrower whatsoever. Badoglio replied, "Have already used ypirite. Should the occasion arise, we'll use flamethrowers."
Badoglio's rival and the commander in charge of Italian forces on the southern front was General Rodolfo Graziani. Known as the Butcher of Libya, Graziani ordered not only the wide-scale use of poison gas, but the throwing of captured rebels from airplanes.
Rodolfo Graziani, soprattutto si era fatto una...
Rodolfo Graziani had become famous for the part he played in the reconquest of Libya,
una guerra che era durata
a war which lasted 10 years and which Graziani had conducted with unprecedented severity, above all in the final phase in Cyrenaica, where he deported and decimated entire populations in order to remove all support from the rebellion.
ogni sostegno. In Etiopia,
In Ethiopia, on the southern front, Graziani acted in the same merciless way.
fu il primo generale
He was the first general to systematically use poison gas.
asfissianti e desiccanti. Pur
Graziani used all means at his disposal, whether lawful or unlawful, in order to beat his adversary Badoglio and be the first to reach Addis Ababa.
But news about Italy's use of poison gas had leaked out to British newspapers. When Badoglio became concerned about world opinion, Mussolini authorized him to use the broom against the foreigners in the battle zone. 5 days later, Italian planes began the first of 19 separate bombing and machine gun raids against international Red Cross hospitals.
il primo e più grave
The heaviest attack on the Red Cross tents occurred during the night of December the 30th, 1935, in the area of Goguryeo on the southern front.
Avendo saputo che Ras de Stadamteo
Having found out that Rastastad Damteo was encamped with his general staff in the vicinity of a Swedish field hospital, Graziani ordered the Air Force General Bernasconi to carry out heavy bombing over the area. Even if, he added in the telegram, this meant unintentionally hitting the hospital tents.
colpire le tende dell'ospedale. Molte bombe, infatti.
Many bombs did in fact fall on the hospital, killing 29 and leaving 50 injured. The Italians were convinced that it was the Red Cross doctors working in the Ethiopian rear zones who were supplying information to the world about the use of gas by the fascists in Ethiopia.
In May 1936, after a 7-month campaign, Badoglio took Addis Ababa. The war was over. Italy's East African Empire was at last a reality, and the fascist regime had reached its pinnacle of success. Throughout every Italian city, crowds hailed Mussolini as the founder of the new empire, and the King Victor Emmanuel, the Emperor of Abyssinia. Italian rule in Ethiopia seemed safe from further challenge until the afternoon on February the 19th, 1937. Graziani, the new Viceroy of Ethiopia, invited the country's nobility to celebrate the birth of the Prince of Naples at his palace in Addis Ababa. Hundreds of poor and crippled peasants were also invited to receive $2 Maria Theresa each from the Viceroy. At noon, as Graziani stood on the steps of his palace, 2 Eritreans who had mingled with the crowd decided to strike out against heavy-handed Italian rule. Bleeding from numerous shrapnel wounds, Graziani was rushed to hospital. Hungarian physician Dr. Ladislav Sava wrote a vivid account of the events that followed the grenade attack.
As soon as the Italians realized that no more bombs were to be feared, the shooting was started by Cortese, who fired with his revolver into the group of Ethiopian dignitaries. The Italian Carabinieri followed this example. In a few moments, there were more than 300 dead in the courtyard and around the palace alone. Hardly a single Ethiopian escaped alive from the courtyard. The general massacre there was particularly senseless and revolting, for the people massed there were a crowd of aged invalids, blind and crippled beggars, and poor mothers of little children.
The Italians have completely lost their heads. Since the incident, undisciplined bands of black shirts and laborers armed with rifles, axes, and clubs have been roaming the streets, killing all the natives in sight, even women, amid scenes of revolting savagery. Many natives whose huts were burning were either shot as they tried to escape or were forced to perish in the flames. Not since the Armenian massacres have I seen a display of such unbridled brutality and cowardice. There have been mass executions in batches of 50 or 100 all over town of wretched people who by no stretch of the imagination could have anything to do with the incident.
Il bilancio della strage.
The toll of the massacres in Addis Ababa and other places in Ethiopia was extremely high. 30,000 victims according to some Ethiopian estimates, 4,000 to 6,000 according to other, perhaps more reliable sources. But retaliation was not yet over. Not having been able to lay his hands on the real instigators and executors of the attack, Graziani also killed off what remained of the Ethiopian intelligentsia. He also had 449 monks and deacons of the conventual city shot on the mere suspicion that they had been able to obtain protection in Debra, Libanos. And also thousands of fortune-tellers and balladeers whose only crime was to have predicted the impending end to Italian domination. According to Ethiopian government estimates, the total number of deaths during the 7 months of war and the 5 years of Italian rule is 760,000. but this figure has certainly been inflated to get more reparations from Italy.
Forse si può lanciare la cifra.
One could perhaps suggest a figure of 200,000 victims, but I make no claims of scientific accuracy.
Anche se sempre approssimativo.
It's easier to note the figures, although they're still approximate, with regard to the effects of the repression in Libya from 1911 to 1932.
Le vittime sono sicuramente oltre.
There were certainly more than 100,000 victims, half of whom were made up of soldiers and guerrillas, and the other half made up of civilians.
Non c'è città.
There is no town or village in Ethiopia where gallows were not erected. They were the symbol of a brigade-style but very effective justice. They were there to command respect and terror. Italian executioners were often photographed in front of the gallows, or holding the chopped-off heads of Ethiopians by the hair. In this merciless and brutal exhibitionism, they were above all displaying their contempt for those people, whom they saw as socially and culturally inferior.
The Ethiopians' most wanted war criminal was Marshal Pietro Badoglio, wanted as a war criminal for his use of poison gas and the deliberate bombing of Red Cross hospitals. He was closely followed by Marshal Rodolfo Graziani, wanted for crimes including murder, massacre, and systematic terrorism. They were the top names among hundreds of suspected Italian war criminals who were to become the targets of the post-war Ethiopian government.